Now, why is so important to keep in mind the ethics of a supply chain? Well, first, because if most of the things are being bought, there's a lot of money going on out there. So there's a lot of opportunities for ethical lapses. And in the book they delve a little bit deeper on three aspects. Personal ethics, that is the ethics of a person. You need persons who are not prone to fail. The supply chain ethics. Sometimes you're buying and the best that you can get to know is your first tire supplier. But what happens about your second or third tire suppliers? Most companies don't know anything, and later it hit them hard. So track and trace now is becoming less of a luxury and more of a necessity. We need to know the complete chain, the complete supply chain, so as to avoid getting into issues like pollution, slave labor, child labor, and a host of other problems. And finally, the environmental ethical behavior. Why? Because we don't want to be seen as companies that are not environmentally responsible. Society is demanding more and more that their companies provide them with products that are problems free. So it's just good business to get to know your complete supply chain and to manage it and check out that they are working ethically. Then we would go on to purchase or produce. Yes, it's just as simple as choosing between making or buying. There are multiple reasons for this decision, but even if cost is a very important one, it's not the only one. For example, when COVID-19, the pandemic, started, Canada had the resources, had the money to buy a huge amount of vaccines from manufacturers in the US. Trump's government decided that it was not going to sell outside until they had enough for their needs. So the Canadians were left out hanging. They decided that that was not going to happen ever again. They were not going to be dependent on the whims of a foreign producer for certain critical logistic supplies. So they have bought by now over 5 times the vaccines that they need, and they are developing the capability to produce their own vaccines. Regardless of the decision that you take, this decision must be reviewed periodically, because reality changes. And remember what we've said before: praxis trumps theory. Practice is the master of what we need to do. Now, let's talk a little bit about the supply function. That is to determine which one is the best provider. And by best provider, we're talking about the quality of their work, their transparency, how much we can trust them, how well do we know them, their suppliers at the same time, what is the best price, what are the best existing delivery conditions. And in many cases, in order to have the best, we must become the supplier's partners and concentrate on developing them, as established in the ISO 9000 standard. So again, we go back to having partners, not just suppliers, partners. Some of the feasible strategies for this supplier function, well, many vendors. In this case, we're searching for the lowest price, and we use it for standardized items. But there's also few suppliers as a strategy. Here we create value and we establish trust relationships. These are usually long-term relationships. Also, we can integrate vertically, be it either upstream integration or downstream integration. That is to say, we absorb or we buy our suppliers, or we buy our distribution networks. In Japan, they have what they call keiretsu networks. We would know them better as cartels. That is an intimate vertical integration of suppliers where we coordinate everything. We coordinate amounts, we coordinate prices. Essentially, it's a cartel. In other parts of the world, they might run afoul of anti-monopolistic behavior. Well, to each reality its own. And then we have virtual companies. What do we mean by virtual companies? And virtual companies are, in a certain sense, the wave of the future. Virtual companies are not, and I repeat, virtual companies are not companies that sell on the internet. Virtual companies are companies that manage to orchestrate the efforts of several companies so as to achieve a product. Some examples: confections, clothing and all that stuff, semiconductors also. These are companies that manufacture things, but they don't have almost anything in their balance sheet. I was talking a little bit earlier that Apple doesn't have a factory. In that sense, Apple can be seen as a virtual company. In reality, it is other companies that manufacture Apple's products. Apple just simply sells them. Our lesson will continue in the next video.